will I come to VLCNegra awards, if at all possible in the future? And to the second part of that question, yes, of course, I will be very honored. The first part is more difficult. There are literary festivals, it's a busy place. There are pros and cons. Among the pros, sometimes you will meet readers that will, it will be a wonderful meeting that will sort of have a big impact on you. The most memorable of which for me was the other year when quite a young boy, too young to be reading my books actually, came up to me and said, oh, my name is Cornelius, and I just want to say I'm so happy that you woke my love of reading, which is sort of the kind of thing you can wait your whole life to hear. And I almost broke down in tears. Also, you meet a lot of other authors and writers, and that can be very satisfactory as well. Memorable meetings, and you can form lasting friendships. And you will have a lot in common. And it's a very lonesome occupation, so sometimes you'll be very happy to meet somebody that you can talk to and relate to. And not least, literary festivals will remind you that you're a very small fish in a very big pond. It's easy to go a bit loopy as a writer because you're, as I said, you spend a lot of time on your own and your imagination becomes a very big deal to you. And at a literary festival, you will realize that there are any number of imaginary worlds out there. So it will be a piece of humble pie, which is good to eat every once in a while. Ooh. Once when I was, actually the first time I was abroad to sort of help do publicity for my book, I was in Amsterdam, and a woman came up to me and said, I was reading your book while I was having breakfast. And it was that scene where that guy cuts out that other guy's tongue. And I threw up a little in my mouth. And I was a bit embarrassed, and I said, ooh, it wasn't my intention to ruin your meal or any such thing. So I'm sorry. And she said, no, it's a compliment to your writing. I think there's a fine line that I did not want to cross when violence turns into voyeurism and it sort of becomes a selling point of the work in question. I didn't want that to be the case. I wanted it to be just as much as I thought was necessary to provide a metaphor of the horrible conditions of the century that the book describes. And another reason it turned out that way is that when I was young, I was quite a nervous little boy, and I processed those feelings by reading a lot of horror. And to me, that is part of the magic of literature, that you can explore difficult taboo emotions in a safe space, in the comfort of your own little room. And it helped a lot to me. And I became less afraid of things. But I may have sort of become a little bit wrongly calibrated, having read that much. You start looking for sort of the worst things that have ever been written, and then you end up with the Marquis de Sade and stuff like that. So I thought what I did was quite mild compared to the worst places I've found in prose. But be warned, people have stopped reading for less. Well, I don't think that much has changed. Actually, it very much depends on where you're looking. Of course, for many of us in the Western industrialized civilization, everyday life is quite easy due to things we take for granted, like aspirin, painkillers, or medical care, things that eases small ailments that would have driven you more or less insane just last century. But on the other hand, there are many bad places in the world where things are not that good. And I tend to think that sort of, in general, human nature is very much the same. And it's the sad lesson when you study history that the only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. The wars of the 18th century did not prevent the Napoleonic Wars of the 19th century, which did not prevent the world wars of the 20th century, and I'm sure there will be much worse to come. But let's be positive and get through this crisis, and I hope we will very soon. As do we all. But certainly in Sweden, this was a big problem. And in much of the source material that got me interested in the 18th century in the first place, there was a poet called Carl Michael Bellman he died in 1795. He's a very well-remembered poet who wrote songs, set them to music, and they are still sung to this day. And he very much paints the picture that life was short, painful, but tonight let's party and get really drunk, and in this one moment we'll sort of find immortality. So yes, I think that was very much the case. Alcoholism was rampant in Sweden. It probably never got worse than during this day and age. But you will see the same thing elsewhere in the world, like take London in the Victorian age, the gin epidemic. When people have it really bad, they will turn to anything to ease their pain. As I said earlier, my very depressing view is that it is very much a timeless concept. But that doesn't mean we go mad and go out and dismember people, as happens in my novel. But I think in everyday competition, you'll find that instinct, and we'll do it in proxy ways, in the way we compete with the people we see around us that we need to sort of gain an advantage over to further our own goals. And when that struggle is sort of bouncing down the Maslow staircase of fulfillment, eventually we'll kill ourselves over the last piece of meat on the table, I think. But as I said, let's stay positive and hope I'm wrong. Well, for me, ever since I was small and spent a little time alone, I fell in love with reading, and books was always very important to me. And I felt a weird connection with the writers of the works that I loved, and I felt they were friends of mine, even though they may have been dead a long time. So the magic of literature was apparent to me, that you can sort of, it's a weird connection between the writer and the reader that transcends space and time. So it was obvious for me from as far as back as I can remember that a writer is the finest thing you can ever be. And I've never wanted to be anything else. But I had no idea what I should write. So I became a journalist instead. And I actually spent 15 years in that occupation, which was a lot of good training in writing. But as time went on, and I still had this dream, it became very scary to sit down and try to write anything serious, because it would mean risking to prove that that dream was beyond my reach. And in many ways, it's easier to know in your heart that you're a writer than to disprove that fact. And to me, that would have been devastating. But I sat down, and this was 2013, I think, and started to write. I had this idea based on a lot of works that had inspired me. Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, for one. From Hell, which is a graphic novel by Alan Moore, for another. So I started, and I'm very happy that I waited that long, because I think I've benefited a lot from having a little more life experience, and that I could not have written that novel at a younger age, I think. So it turned out okay. No, of course not. In fact, the first draft took a year to write, and then I sent it out to a lot of different publishing houses in Sweden, and nobody wanted it. But I got, from a few, I had the best kind of rejection. That is, you get a personal letter, somebody has read through the whole thing, and you sort of get a little review of what they think is wrong with it. And in my case, there was too much history. And I reread my own manuscript, and I agreed. And that is a very easy trap to fall into when you write historical fiction, because you'll read the source material, there will be a lot of it, and it will be full of small, wonderful details and stories that you fall in love with, and you really want to pass them on to a new reader, so they can have the same experience. But if you do that too much, it will happen at the expense of anything else that will make your novel worth reading, like, for instance, plot and likable characters. So I rewrote the whole thing, sent it out again, and the same thing happened quite a lot of times. And I think the final, I had actually given up when a publisher got back to me who had forgotten the manuscript and said, "Oh, so sorry, we forgot this in a pile somewhere. So you got your answer now, and we don't want it either. But sorry." And I had the cheek at that point. Like I said, I had given up at that point, but I wrote back and said, "Actually, I've rewritten this manuscript a lot of times since you read it. Would you like to look at the latest version?" And they said yes, and that is the version that eventually was printed. And when it came out, I had very reasonable expectations. Sweden is a small country. I had no thought whatsoever on any foreign market, because I thought I had written a novel on Swedish history, which holds very little interest for anybody but a Swede, I thought. and just being able to make a living as an author in Sweden is highly unlikely, because we're a small nation. There's 10 million inhabitants here, and not many of them are readers. Less and less every year. So I thought, fine, no problem. At best, it will be sort of something I'll do on the side while I keep trudging on as a journalist, but that will be fine, because the dream of my lifetime will be fulfilled. I will actually be a writer. And my only fear was that the novel would sort of fail so badly that the publishing house would say, we don't want to work with you anymore. So I hoped it would do just okay enough to let them, to allow them to let me write another book and keep doing that. So it was very surprising to me that the things happened that actually happened. And that's it for me. Thank you so much.